Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. Today we are talking about transition, our Year 6 transition. There's Year 6s going up into their high school, and some of the challenges and some of the things that they are going to face, and maybe some practical solutions of how we can help support with that um, as we go along. My name is Samantha Buttle. I'm the head of teaching and learning at Dyslexia Sparks. I've been with the charity since it started in 2016. And transition, I think, is a really vital part of our children's education and making that process as smooth as we can for them. All children face challenges at this time, and lots of the children that I work with dyslexia, some of those challenges can feel even bigger for some of those children. Just to let you know who we are, Dyslexia Sparks, we are a registered charity. We have our office based in Hessel in Hull. We offer a range of different services. So we offer services, assessments, training, that kind of thing. We also, the bulk of our work is done through private clients, again through assessments, but also tuition. We offer specialist tuition. We work alongside other organisations, so we also work with people in the workplace as well, and working with other agencies and different charities as well. Okay, so we work with a number of different types of people, types of organisation, and all age groups as well. Our services do range, and we use all our services cover a range of age groups and in different situations, so private assessments, but also those through other agencies and schools, colleges and universities. So as I said, I'm the head of teaching and learning. I started with the charity in September 2016. I am a specialist teacher and a dyslexia assessor as well, and I am dyslexic myself, so I like to think I've got a bit of inside knowledge of some of the experiences some of our children will go through, and some of the challenges that they may face as well. The aims of this morning are to discuss some of those challenges and think about practical strategies that we can use to help support that. And I'll also talk about additional support that we have available. So the first part of call with transition is usually the visits. Transition visits vary from school to school, and each school do this very separately. It also depends on the area that you're in as well. So the transition visits themselves are really vitally important for our young people to ask any questions that they may have, to go and see the environment itself if they haven't been before. Hopefully everybody knows where they're going now. There will be some students that are still going through appeal and things like that, but hopefully most of you will know which schools your children are going to, and you can start that transition process. I've got my middle son, he's going through this process this year as well. So yesterday we got his visit day, which is in July. I know some schools do full weeks of transition at the end of this term, but if you're not sure, I would speak to Year 6 teachers or ask the school directly if they have any further information on that. Some schools do offer smaller scale family tours. So if your child is particularly anxious or has particular concerns, you can request those. Again, each school is very different on how they do that. Some children are offered additional transition days as well, particularly those children with EHCPs or you know, bigger anxieties maybe compared to their peers and things like that. So some schools do offer those extra transitional sessions, but it's finding what's available through your school. After COVID and the transition that happened during those COVID years, a lot of virtual tours are still available on websites as well. So they were not all, but mostly created during that time when there's year 6 transitioning during that COVID time. A lot of the virtual tours were created, and you can still access those for some schools, and it just gives children a chance to have a look around. I think lots of the comments I get from the young people I work with is about the size of the building and often the panic about getting lost and things like that. So if they are able to go and have a look around, will obviously have a huge impact on that and make a huge difference to them. Some schools also offer maps. So again, these may be on their website, but they may get given them on transition days as well. So there are a number of maps, whether they be online or paper copies, that they can use to help find their way around their new setting. Another big concern that I hear from lots of my students is about travelling to school and how that will take place. I think as parents as well, this is often a concern that we have about them being that little bit more independent often, not always, depends again on what school they're going to and where you live and things like that. But travelling to school can cause a lot of anxieties for some children. I think talking about the ways of travelling and discussing that with your child and what is most appropriate for them is really important, and doing a trial run of that. So interestingly, I've met lots of children who live very near their high schools but would be or would find it very difficult to walk there on their own if they are in walking distance. Often they've not had to do that before, particularly on their own. So for some children, I know that can be a big concern. Again, and as parents, worrying about will they get there and will they get there on time. So with a trial run, if it's walking or biking, so setting out that route so they know where they're going, they'll know how long it will take them to get there, and they know the safest run for that. If your child or your children get a bus to school, do they know where to go and collect that, and do they know where they will get dropped off? Some children will go on a school only bus, which does help and does make it a little bit easier. But if your child is getting on a public bus, going through those steps, have they been on a bus before? Do they know how to pay for the bus? Those kind of things, and those processes, and allowing them to practice those before that happens. If your child gets dropped off by you or grandparents or friends or anything like that, again, do they know where they'll be dropped off and picked up from? Parking around schools is really difficult, so sort of having a little meet-up point, I think, is really helpful, particularly if your children are quite anxious about these things. As I said, sometimes this is the first time some children will be doing a lot of these things independently. And provisions if anything goes wrong. So if they miss their bus, for instance, do they know what to do next? Do they have a phone? Can they call you? Do they then walk to school? I think them knowing that there's a backup plan is really helpful in terms of easing some of those anxieties and some of those worries if anything does go wrong. If children are walking and meeting up with friends, things like that, do they know what to do if their friends aren't there on time? Can they call their friends, or do they know what time they need to leave it to at the latest before they set off and start setting off to make sure that they get to school on time for them? Travel is often one of the biggest concerns for lots of our children, particularly those with dyslexic difficulties, you know, so if they're handling money, things like that may come up. I'll talk a bit more about money in a minute, and also the things associated with buses, things like time and those kind of things. When transitioning to high school, it's probably the first time that our children become more responsible for their lesson preparation. So new routines, obviously they get very used to these very quickly, but routines and timetables and being able to plan for those and organising for those can be quite difficult for dyslexic learners. In terms of timetabling, again, thinking back to time and how long they're having lessons may be a concern to your children. Do they know what time school starts? Do they know what time school finishes? Lots of our children like to know when lunchtime is and what time that is. The school websites often plan out when the school day is, and you can often access that. So it may be worth looking at those kind of things. But the big change, another big change, is the routine and making sure that you've got the right equipment and organising yourself for those kind of things. Lots of the children I work with find that really difficult. So being able to take the right equipment on the right days. So we often suggest using lists or checklists so they can be handwritten, they can be printed, they can be laminated so you can tick it off and wipe it off if that works for your child. We make lots of recommendations, but part of this journey, part of this transition is those children finding what works for them and what doesn't work for them, and how they can use and transfer those skills into adult life. I had one student who was wonderful. She worried so desperately about not being prepared for lessons and not having the right equipment that she took every book and every bit of equipment every single day. And I did suggest lots of these things to her, so lists or checklists or, you know, writing things out, separate ones for each day, doing things the night before, being that organised and prepared for those things. But that didn't work for her. It made her feel so worried about not having what she needed. She reverted back to the things that worked for her. Some of our children will require support and check-in, particularly in that first probably half term, the first few weeks, definitely, with organisation and ensuring that they've got everything that they need on the days that they need it on. Some children will need support beyond then. You know, for some children, the organising of themselves, dyslexic children can have real difficulties with organisation. Personally, I overcame those things with my dyslexic tendencies to the point where I became over-organised and I had to have things done in a certain way because that's what worked for me. So I would be very prepared. I would do everything the day before, because if I left it to the morning, I would be so worried that I didn't have the right things. It created more problems than it solved, really. So some children will require further support than others in ensuring that they've got these things that they need. The introduction of new lessons. As I mentioned before, when I mentioned maps, the location of those lessons. Most schools now have departments or sections of the school where they know that they need to go for certain lessons. Again, this is where maps and virtual tours or actually physically going are really important and really helpful in supporting this transition phase. Knowing where they're going for certain lessons is really important to ensure that they are there on time and they're in the right place on the days that they need to be. Again, as I've just said, the organising of the equipment and making sure what they need on those days, PE kits, maths equipment, all those kind of things that are subject specific, again, are things that we will need to think about and help our children organise as they transition through this time. Time is something that I keep coming back to. Time for dyslexic learners is a difficulty and can be a difficulty. Judging time as well. So going back to when we talked about travelling to school, and particularly if they're going independently, either walking or biking, understanding, estimating that time that they will need to do that. Again, moving around the school and the time they will need to get from one part of the school to another will have an impact on them as well. The reason I keep bringing time up and why it's so important is lots of dyslexic learners, and I am seeing this more and more as technology is evolving. Many of our dyslexic learners and non-dyslexic learners actually really struggle with analog clocks and reading the time. Most classrooms that I've seen still have analog clocks, and most of our students are more comfortable with looking at the digital time. Those children with phones and computers and things, everything is usually put on digitally. So it's understanding how that matches up to an analog clock. So you may not think that your child has particular difficulties with time because they may be able to use it in a digital way, but it's just to be aware that in school it may be presented slightly different using an analog clock. Also, if times are written on timetables and things like that, sometimes they'll use the 12-hour clock and sometimes they'll use the 24-hour clock. And again, some students find the real difficulty of transferring that information over if they're using a 24-hour clock and understanding what those times mean and how that can impact on their day. Going back to organisation, homework is something that impacts all learners, I think, at this age. Homework is presented very differently. The expectations of homework is very different through transition, and it's how we monitor that as parents. Every school again does this really differently, so it would be interesting to know how your school or your high school do it. Lots of young people now use maths homework is digitally based. Lots of that is online. For my son's school, my eldest son's school, for instance, they send me an email each week, halfway through the week, so I know if he's started it, I know how far through it he is, or I know if he's finished it, and I also know the due date for that. Obviously, not all homework is set like that. Lots of young people have planners which they have to write their homework in. Again, that can be quite difficult for dyslexic learners because we're going back to that organising side of things. Yes, they are possibly writing it into their planner. Is it written in the right place? Do they write it on the day it was given to them? Do they write it on the day that it's due in? And again, different people work in different ways, and it's maybe thinking about what way works best for your child and maybe talking through some of those things. Support being offered for homework. In terms of online accessibility, most schools run a homework club of some description, or there is a set time that they can go and use school facilities to complete online homework. So if you don't have online facilities at home to do those kind of homework assignments, there will be something in place at the school. There has to be. It's just finding out what that is for your school and how that is run. And again, lots of that information tends to be on the website for you and for your children. But if you've got any particular concerns, asking anybody who works in the school during that transition time, any transition meetings you may have, again, is really useful, and they can talk you through that process. The schedule of homework moving up to high school, lots of you will have already have older children and will have been through this before. Some of you might have done it with other children, and now you're going through this process with your dyslexic child, maybe for the first time. The schedule of homework can increase quite dramatically, and again, this really depends on certain subjects, but also in different schools. The schools I work with are so different across the board. No two are the same, really, and the expectation amount are very rarely similar. So that schedule of homework, I often find with our dyslexic learners, planning time in to complete that homework can be really helpful. Our dyslexic learners are often very tired after a busy day at school. They often have to work significantly harder than their peers to maintain the level and to achieve what others are achieving. So setting time aside for those homework assignments during the week so that your child knows what to expect when they get home, what time is set aside for that, and when that will happen and take place. And hopefully that will make that homework process a little bit easier for them and hopefully for you as well. Lunchtime is often our children's favourite time of day, and knowing what will happen during that time. All the children will go through the lunchtime routine on their transition visits, of course, but sort of knowing what options are for lunch. Some children find that something triggering to not know what food will be available. Again, lots of schools provide menus and things on the websites that you can access beforehand, so they can sort of plan that in for the day. How they pay for lunch is an ever-evolving situation, I've found, with my eldest son anyway. Lots of schools now don't carry cash, so it's very rare that they will pay cash for things. Some schools have a card. So again, thinking of organisation, our dyslexic learners, organising them so they know where that card is. How do they top up that card? How do they make sure that there's enough money on that card? So again, the school that my son is at, I have to top that up on an app called Parent Pay. There's lots of these apps around that are very similar and do the same things. So how do they pay for lunch? Some have a card, some have a fingerprint now. So some of our children get fingerprinted to pay for their lunch. And again, it's sort of relieving some of that anxiety of this is what's going to happen and this is how you know. In my experience, the dinner staff have been really helpful with my son. If he hasn't quite had enough money on his card, or if he's getting low, they will let him know when he pays for his dinner that it maybe needs topping up. He doesn't always remember to let me know. So again, it's just being aware of whatever process that is for your school. So again, it's really hard to advise with that in terms, with every school being so different, but finding that out before your child goes may be quite helpful for them. And then going back to where do they go, that getting around the place, do they know where lunch is provided? If they're taking their own lunch, is there a certain place they can sit and eat that, or are there other areas provided for that? Again, every school is so different, so it's really hard to advise on that specifically without knowing which school everybody is going to. I have mentioned money a few times, and just because I do think it's one of those things that is really important. As I said previously, not many schools carry cash now. They tend to pay for lunch via other means, but for whatever reason your child may need cash, possibly for the bus or things like that. Understanding that value of money is such a difficulty. I was at a teacher training meeting yesterday, and we was talking about, you know, the size of the coins has no correspondence to the value, and things like that, and what does that value mean. So some children who struggle with money, although maybe not within their school day, particularly over lunchtime, I am thinking more of those children who possibly get on a public bus and would have to pay for that. Sort of being aware of how much that would be for them, and so they know how much change to expect as well. I've seen it lots of times where children hand over their money, and then they start walking off, and they're calling after them to give them the change. So yes, so just so that they've got some understanding possibly of that, of what their needs might be, money wise. School communication, for us and for our children is vital, really. Dyslexic learners don't necessarily have an EHCP or a support plan in place. Again, schools are very different with how they support dyslexia and how that is transferred over, from primary to secondary as well. Your main ports of call will be your child's tutor, their head of year, and probably the SENCO. There will also be support staff in the school, and again, how this is allocated is very different within each school, and also very dependent on your child and their needs. So if they've got an EHCP, for instance, it may be specified how many hours and how many hours of support they would require and what lessons that would be required in. Not all dyslexic learners will have support staff with them. It's quite rare to see that come as standard. Knowing who your child's contacts are, I know some of you won't know until September, but hopefully your children will get that information, and be able to pass that on to you. Some schools also have specific contact times for those with additional needs. So some schools hold surgeries where it's an open forum for possibly an hour, on a certain day, and you're just allowed to drop in and go with any concerns or worries that you've got. Obviously, we have parents' evenings, but if you do have any concerns or worries about your children, most schools, I would hope all schools would say, you know, please contact us before parents' evening. It tends to be late in October. So, you know, if you've got any concerns in those first couple of days or first couple of weeks, please contact the school, go through your child's tutor or your head of year. And then hopefully if it's not resolved, then the SENCO would be able to help with any additional support that your child may need. The communication of those needs should have been passed on from your primary school, particularly this time of year, this sort of term, when those transition visits are starting to take place. Some of your children will have been already, and already had started that visit process. If your child has got an additional need, which is why I sort of assume you're all here today, I would personally make contact with the SENCO myself, introduce who you are, let them know any concerns that you've got, and check that information has been passed on. That's not because I don't trust the primary schools or anything like that. You know, they have hundreds and hundreds of children. They have lots of information that is being passed on and carried over. And occasionally some children do get missed and information gets missed. So just ensuring that important, that vital information has been sent over for your child. How your specific learning difficulties are communicated, I think, is not the same for every school, but they often follow a similar sort of pattern. So as I said, that information should be passed on from your primary school, And again, I would make contact with the Senko as well, just to introduce who you are, who your child is, and the needs that they have. I think the biggest difficulty for high schools is how those learning difficulties are then spread amongst the number of teaching staff that your child will come in contact with. So some schools have a learning passport, it's called, or a learning journey, that will have all your child's information on it, and that will be sent to all their new teachers. So if it's dyslexia, it may have information on please do not make them read out loud, those kind of things. It will also have other things, such as what their strengths are, what they're good at, but also what maybe some support they will need with, and how some of that support is best communicated. In terms of dyslexia, if you are contacting the school and the Senko, or you are going for a visit yourself, ask them what they currently have in place for dyslexic learners. Most schools have something or a pathway of some kind in place, and maybe discussing that and seeing what support your child will be given. The more information they have before your child starts in September, the more time they have to put those things in place. So hopefully when your child arrives in September, they're not waiting weeks and weeks and weeks for possibly intervention or support to be put in place. Hopefully with the right information in place now, that those things can be sorted for the day they arrive. Some of our learners, some of our dyslexic learners will require additional support onto what is already available. If your child has got an EHCP, hopefully that has been reviewed with this transition period in mind, but thinking about any other specific needs that your child may have, in addition to the dyslexic side of things that may be seen as more traditionally dyslexic. So thinking about what your child's needs are, maybe expressing those to the school, as I say, I think can be really important. Your child's interests, dyslexia, we talk a lot about the difficulties and the things we find hard, and the worries and concerns we have, but actually our dyslexic learners are often amazing in other ways, even if we have difficulties with reading and spelling, for instance. So helping them identify particular clubs or areas of interests that they have. I often find with my son who is dyslexic, and he also has autism, identifying them and talking through what some of those clubs could be and what that means, and what you'll get to do. Having a timetable, again, it sort of brings timetabling difficulties in. So if it's after school, how does that impact on them getting home? If it's at lunchtime, again, it's that timing side of things. Do they know where they need to be on which day, at which time? Days of the week and sequencing can be quite difficult for some dyslexic learners, and lots of the young people I come into contact with and work with, some of them at 10, 11, 12, 13 don't know the days of the week in the right order. So being able to support with that, it allows them to make new friends, but also it helps support what their areas of strength are. If your child is struggling at school with the academic side of things, sometimes having that interest, whether it be sport or art or chess or anything that they enjoy. One school one of my students goes to, he's got a Warhammer club and he absolutely loves that. It makes going to school that little bit easier and that little bit more enjoyable for them as well. Having something that is that they're good at and something that they find interesting. Social and emotional support I've put on here. Lots of children will find this transition period difficult. difficult and hard and worrying, all those things are perfectly normal and perfectly fine feelings to have. But if those worries or concerns go beyond not the norm's not a very good word to use, but you know, if it's causing particular difficulties, you know, is there a specific member of staff that you can go to for social and emotional support? It's proven, there's lots of research into children with specific learning difficulties, such as dyslexia, are more likely to have social and emotional difficulties. Not always, and that can fluctuate for children, and just like it can with us as adults, but schools often have a specific member of staff available for that kind of thing, and it's just knowing who that is. It's how those difficulties again are communicated, and each school will put that process differently. So again, I can't advise you know exactly what to do, but knowing what that process is, knowing what that communication pathway is, and knowing who to get that communication to is really helpful. And the social and emotional support in lessons as well. How do they ask for help? Some of our learners are really reluctant to put their hands up and ask for help. Some don't have a problem with that, which is fantastic. But some children will find it hard, particularly as they get older through this high school journey, will find it more difficult to ask for help within lessons. So is there something that can be done to support that so they don't have to put their hand up? Some schools have a little card system on their table where they can put a green card up if they're feeling okay and they don't need any help and support. Some will have a red card that means please come over and speak to me and help me. Again, each school runs this slightly differently, but there will be a process in place for this. And this goes back to your child's specific needs. Your child may not need that, but it's just being aware that if they do need that, what that looks like in their school setting. Additional support that your child may have or may need going through the transition period up to high school. So any child with an EHCP should be having a yearly review anyway, sort of knowing when that review should take place. It is yearly, so that should be a process that hopefully that you're aware of. If you are applying for an EHCP, please speak to the school about supporting that. Parents can apply for an EHCP without the school, in terms of you can make the application without the school being involved. However, once your application goes in, the school will be required to provide information about what's happening in school and what support your child is receiving. Some schools who feel like children don't meet the criteria for an EHCP but may have an IEP, they're sometimes called, which is an individual education plan or a support plan. Again, these are often named different things. So it's something around a plan that supports your child, whatever that may be called. Again, those should be reviewed on a regular basis, usually termly, and that would be with somebody from the SENCO team or the SENCO department. But knowing how often those reviews take place and what the school's process is for that. Your child may go up to high school with nothing like that in place, and it's keeping those lines of communication open of, okay, they're doing okay right now, they maybe don't need a specific plan in place for them, but if things start to become more difficult for them as the high school journey takes place, what is the process of allowing that to be put into place? And again, lots of this information is usually available on the school website and in school handbooks, but meeting with teachers and particularly the SEND department can be really, you know, informative. If you have got an open evening that you can go as well, again, some of those will have taken place through the choices, you know, when we were making choices for which high school to take our children to, but going and speaking to them as well on transition, now that those placements are confirmed. Obviously, we wish all our children good luck, and we hope that they will enjoy this transition time. There's lots of worries for us as parents, and also for our children as well. One thing I've just it sprung into my mind about homework, and I'm worrying about homework already. If your child is dyslexic, they should not be expected to copy homework down from a board. This should be printed or sent to them. Lots of children have school emails now. Again, after COVID, lots of things were set up to support online learning, and lots of that has continued. So some schools email homework out, which is fantastic in terms of you don't get a garbled message written in their planners about what homework is, or, you know, if they're copying down spellings and things like that. None of those things should be taking place for our dyslexic learners, because if they copy any of it down wrong, they're going to learn it wrong, or they're going to complete their homework incorrectly. Yeah, so we wish all our year sixes good luck for their journey through to their transition. Hopefully some of these things are probably really obvious and things, you know, that you've already thought about and spoken about, but hopefully there's a few hints and tips in there as well, to make this transition process a little bit easier for you all. I am going to stop the recording now before we do questions and answers, so that you don't have to have your any specific questions recorded.